We all do know that there is a discipline or a subject called physics. Some of us have studied physics. What do we study in the discipline or the subject called physics? We study what is tangible, what is physical, what you can touch with your hands, what you can see with your eyes, what you can smell with your nose. Now, physical reality is studied and explored and probed into in the subject called physics. But as against physical study of the material reality, in this discipline called philosophy, there is another subject which is the opposite of physics. That is called metaphysics. Now, the question is, what is metaphysics? If you go to the etymological meaning of the word meta, it is a Greek word which means beyond. So in other words, when we say metaphysics, that is a study of what is beyond material reality, what is beyond physical reality. Now, just as there is a study of physics, which is the study of material stuff, and also there is the study of metaphysics, that is above and beyond what is tangible and what is physical, we also do see the development or the progression of God's revelation. Why do I say this? Because when you study the scripture, especially reading through number of scripture scholars, they summarize the entire revelation of God as God's creation in the Old Testament and God's recreation in the New Testament. Now, when the scripture scholars explain the Old Testament as the revelation of God's creation, creative work, and the New Testament as the revelation of God's recreation of the world and the cosmos, we do have to go to the very words that are used. Now, for example, in the Old Testament, if you read the book of Genesis, there the word that is used in Hebrew text is ruah of God, which means the wind of God. The Greek word is pneuma, which means the Spirit of God. So now the author of the book of Genesis says that in the creation of the material reality, that is the creation of the world and the cosmos, what was creating the world was the ruah of God, which means the wind of God, or the pneuma in Greek is the Spirit of God. So now there is also in the book of Genesis, when God created man, the author says he breathed into the nostrils of this first man, and there came the human person. So which means, in other words, that in the creation of man, God's Spirit was at work. So therefore we can say, in the creation of the physical world, the physical reality, in the creation of what we see as material reality, the author wanted us to believe and to understand that deep within the physical reality of the world is the Spirit. So now, that is one of the foundational teachings of Christianity. In the material world, there is the presence of God's Spirit, the ruah of God, the pneuma of God, the wind of God, or in other words, the Spirit of God. Now, today, my dear friends, as we celebrate the feast of the Pentecost, we are reminded that on that particular day, as we read the scriptures, the Gospel of John, we can see that the risen Christ comes and breathed into the disciples his own spirit. So now when you read this, it is very interesting how the word that was used in the creation of the physical man is the same word that is being used here in the Gospel of John when Jesus is giving his spirit to his own disciples. So now what the author wanted us to uphold and believe is that in the creation of God, it was the spirit that was breathed into the man. And also in the day of the Pentecost, it is the spirit that was within the risen Lord that was breathed into them. So now, for all of us who are celebrating the feast of Pentecost, my dear friends, what does this mean for us? Now, one of the teachings or one of the theological reflections of the modern day theologian Elia DeLeo, in one of her books, she says that God's Spirit from the beginning in the act of creation was bringing oneness into existence. What is disordered is brought into oneness. Now that is why in the book of Genesis there is this story of the Tower of Babel. Now what happened there was, after mankind withdrew or moved away from God's oneness with them, they did not understand each other. Now in contrast, you can see in the New Testament, on the day of the Pentecost, the disciples or the people there were able to understand each other's languages as if it was their own. So now, the authors of the scripture always try to emphasize that in the creation activity of God, what God did was to bring oneness to his creation. And that was to be with him, to be with God, so that oneness is lived out. And in the act of recreation, Jesus, the risen one, is calling for oneness and inviting them all to oneness. So in other words, my dear friends, as believers in Christianity, as believers in the teachings of Christ, celebrating the feast of the Pentecost is to remind ourselves in the first place that we have lost that oneness as individuals, because sinful nature of mankind is to find that inner brokenness, inner division within. The more divided we are from within, the Spirit of God is dissipated. The Spirit of God is not present. But the more oneness I find with myself, with my brothers and sisters, with the entire creation of God, there is oneness and there is God's creation coming alive. God's recreation in each and every one of us is once again, my dear friends, to receive that oneness, the spirit of oneness that God has intended for all of us. You and myself, all of us are called into a life of oneness. That is life in the Spirit. Because it is one thing for us to say that I am a Christian, and it's completely another thing for me to say that I do not want to have anything to do with who are non-Christians or those who do not belong to my race, my country, my land. Because Christianity is all about being one with your God and being one with your brothers and sisters and being one with God's creation. That is to be truly living out the Spirit of God within our day to day life.